Welcome to a special edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. Thanks so much for being with us. Now, we will have no phone calls today as we continue our look ahead to the Giants' regular season schedule. The New Orleans Saints are our team today. They will be playing the Giants in Week 14. That's December 8th at MetLife Stadium. And to do so, we bring in Saints sideline reporter Jeff Nowak of WWL Radio in New Orleans. Jeff, very good to see you, and I can't promise you bayou weather when you get up to East Rutherford.
Oh, man, yeah. So this is my second year on the sideline, right? Last year, I was like, oh, man, what are we going to get? We're going to get cold weather. We have the Packers in Lambeau. That ended up being week 3. So really no cold weather games. This year, got Giants up at, I think, December, right? Early December.
That's December 8th, yeah.
Right, and then December 22nd up in Lambeau. So I'm going to have to go buy myself some winter coats, right? Like I grew up in Connecticut, so I grew up with the cold, but I've been down here long enough that all of that has filtered out of my wardrobe. So I'm going to have to get out to some sporting goods stores, buy some hand warmers for these games.
I suspect another thing you're going to have to get used to, the Saints coming off a 9-8 season, make a big change with their offense. Clint Kubiak comes in, bringing in that motion that the 49ers love to use out in San Francisco. How different and dramatic is this going to be?
Well, I mean, it depends. How much time have you spent watching the Saints, or how much time have you spent watching, I don't know, heck, half the NFL at this point? Because realistically, it's a big change for Saints fans. The big change for anyone who has watched and appreciated the Sean Payton, Drew Brees offense over the years. But like you said, if you've paid attention to the 49ers, to the Dolphins, to any of these kind of Kyle Shanahan, Gary Kubiak type schemes, this will look very familiar. The question is how the Saints operate it. And, it's with with Derek Carr and Alvin Kamara and all these guys in there, can they kind of hit the ground running? Because, it's a change in offense, but it's not a change in leadership. So you have a coach who I would consider to be on something of a hot seat, right? You go from 7-10 to 9-8. Obviously, expectations are what they are. But yeah, that's going to be the story of this season for the Saints is A, what does it look like? And B, does it work at all? And so we'll find that out.
Derek Carr threw for nearly 4,000 yards last year. Touchdown to interception ratio of better than 3-1. Nearly 70% completes. Help me out here, Jeff. I kept hearing that the people in New Orleans were very unhappy with him and that they don't think they got what they paid for.
Yeah, so there's a few reasons there. And one being, I think when the average person hears a quarterback salary, they just their eyes light up. Like, what do you mean they paid him $150 million? Well, then you look around the NFL, look what Trevor Lawrence just got. What was it, 5 years, 275? So when you look at it, Derek Carr is paid as now with Trevor Lawrence's deal, the 16th highest paid quarterback in the NFL. He's making less than Daniel Jones. So from there, I think the perspective is skewed. Like anytime you give a guy a big contract, you're like, oh, he's going to be a star. Anyway, so that's one thing. Two, so his numbers are what they are. The frustration with Derek kind of crept in early in the year for the first half of the year where, there was a game against the Jaguars where they came back in the second half, but it was like a lot of yardage kind of built up in that second half where they were coming back from 2-3 scores down. Same thing with the Texans. They didn't really do anything in the first half, and then they made a rally. So there was some appreciation for, the numbers aren't terrible, but they are built up in these comeback scenarios that it's not representative of a competitive season. He was dealing with an injury, suffered in week 3 against the Packers. I think that impacted him more than he let on throughout the season. But the biggest issue was red zone statistics, red zone numbers. The Saints were moving the ball. They just were not paying it off with touchdowns. And about midway through the season, the Saints really rededicated themselves to red zone work. And week 12 against the Falcons was the worst. I think they had 5 red zone trips and it ended with 5 field goals. Or actually, I'm sorry, 3 field goals, 1 fumble, 1 interception. No touchdowns in that game. Saints lost a game they should have won. And so later in the year, that flipped, right? They were one of the most efficient red zone offenses in the NFL over the final 6 games. Derek Carr was one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL over the final 6 games. I think he completed 75% of his passes. It was 12 touchdowns, 1 interception over the final month of the season. So that's kind of where you land. Which Derek Carr is the Derek Carr that you're going to see? Are you going to see the second half Derek Carr who seemed to figure it out? Or are you going to see the Derek Carr that struggled in a new offense, that is now learning another new offense, So I think that's where I think there's some reluctant optimism, because when you do finish the season as well as he did, which when you look at the numbers, that really helped his statistics get where they were in terms of, okay, this was not a terrible season, so why are we all so mad? And that's where it is. And I think you look at Clint Kubiak, you look at all the new kind of wrinkles brought in on offense, and you feel like the defense should be back where it was. Y'all know the Saints defense well. They've really played in that game against Tommy Cutlets last year. They really showed out well, and that was a really good stretch for them. So if you get that type of defense along with an offense that's competent, you should have a playoff team, and that's where Derek Carr fits into the mix.
All right, well, let's talk about Carr's partners on the other end of the ball. We know what Chris Olave is, Rashid Shaheed, who's really a great return guy, but is also one of their receiving core. Where else are those receiving numbers going to come from?
Yeah, that's a big question, right? So you have Cedric Wilson, you have Equinemius St. Brown. I think there is going to be a very heavy emphasis on Chris Olave. I think this is going to be a big year for him, and I think they're looking at him. He's been really good. Like he's had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, fringe Pro Bowler. He hasn't made it yet. He will. I think this is the season they're hoping that he jumps up into that like upper stratosphere of receivers, where you're talking, instead of 85 catches, you're looking at 100 plus catches. Instead of 1,100 yards, you're looking at 1,500 yards, and he becomes kind of that top end wide receiver that he's kind of been teasing that ability as he's kind of been sitting in the shadow of Mike Thomas. Well, Mike Thomas isn't here anymore. This is the Chris Olave show, and we're going to see how that goes. Rashid Shaheed, I think he is an underrated commodity in the NFL. Not a lot of people know who he is because he's a UDFA, but I think he led the NFL in passes of 40 plus yards downfield last year. He definitely did for touchdowns. I think he had 5 touchdowns, and they were all 30 plus yards. So he's like that premier deep threat. Like they have kind of that underneath guy in Olave, the possession guy in Olave, and then the deep threat. So you kind of see how they interact together in the Clint Kubiak scheme. It kind of reminds me of, not so much the kind of past duos that the Saints have had, right? With like Mike Thomas and Ted Ginn and guys like that.
Sure.
And it's more like the Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle combination down in Miami. And that's considering that's the offense that you're really kind of mimicking them in the 49ers.
Right.
It makes more sense that it might have in the Sean Payton scheme. So I think there's some optimism to be had there. One issue they're going to find is I don't know where the tight end stats are going to come from. Juwan Johnson has been that guy over the last few years. He just had foot surgery. He missed minicamp. So they're hopeful that he's back by the beginning of the season, but it's tough to say. And there's really no depth in that room to speak of. Jimmy Graham's not here anymore. I don't think he's going to be coming back to save the day. Foster Moro's here. He's always been kind of that, dirty work guy. He's not a guy who's going to be moving the chains. So, if you are without Juwan Johnson, I don't know where you go there. Right. So that's more so than the wide receiver room. I think that the wide receiver room will overperform expectations to an extent. I don't know how you get to league average at the tight end position right now. And that's from a passing game perspective. That's my bigger concern.
Well, I'm going to ask you about the running backs, though, too, because you're running them back, right? Kamara, Jamal Williams, Kendry Miller, same guys who were there last year. They didn't do anything to tweak that situation at all.
They did not. And, obviously they're dealing with some drama with Alvin Kamara as we talk right now. I don't know if that'll be solved by the time, this goes on the air or whatever. But that's a question. And, you look at that running back room and, when you're talking about, hey, can you play hardball with Alvin Kamara and say, no, you're going to play out your contract? Well, I don't think the Saints are in a particularly high leverage position when you don't really have anyone behind him that you could say, yeah, we'll just give him the reps. Like this isn't a Ezekiel Elliott, Tony Pollard situation in Dallas where a lot of people were probably saying, I kind of would rather go with Tony anyway. No one's saying, hey, yeah, give all the reps to Jamal, give all the reps to Kendra. The rookie did flash a little bit, when he was on the field. In week 18, he had a really solid game against the Falcons. They blew him out 48-17. Alvin didn't play in that game. He was the RB1. But Jamal, his season went so poorly that the final offensive play of the season, they overrode the head coach and ran a touchdown out of the victory formation just to get him a touchdown. They felt bad for him. Like that's how poorly that season went for him. So can he bounce back from that? I don't know. But it's not a pretty situation. That's why I think the Alvin Kamara deal gets done. I know Kendra Miller has also been dealing with an ankle injury all last year. I'm hearing that, he's still kind of dealing with that. I think he's going to have a procedure to clean that up. So that might impact his offseason to some extent. So, I mean, yeah, if it's not Alvin, I don't know who it is. And that's the real issue with this Saints offensive roster, it's not necessarily the top end options. They're solid in those spots, right? They're solid at wide receiver 1. They're solid at running back 1. They're mostly solid at quarterback. If you have Juwan Johnson, you're solid. But what happens when you get past that top option? Where's the depth? And I don't see it at running back. I don't see it at tight end. I really don't see it at wide receiver. So I think that's where, by the time the Saints play the Giants, just when you get to that point in the season, week 1, you assume there's going to be health and you're not really worried about, okay, who's my wide receiver 4? Week 15, week 14, you might be relying on those guys. And I just don't know who that is when you get there. So that's, to me, if this season falls apart for the Saints, it's going to happen past the first line of the depth chart.
Trust me, Jeff, I know all about injuries. And if they can happen, they probably will. Okay. Let's talk about the Saints offensive line, which to me also seems to be rather sketchy. They drafted Fuaga, who now, if I understand correctly, may have to move from right tackle to left tackle. We don't know about Ramchek's health. Over the years, he's been badly beaten up. And I know Trevor Penning is still there. What are they thinking about as they try to construct this line in September?
Yeah, well, I think part of the thinking is we want to go more athletic because the blocking scheme you're shifting to relies more on getting guys out in space. And I think that will help protect a young guy like Trevor Penning. Like you mentioned, Taliesin Fuanga is the number 14 pick in the draft. He played mostly right tackle in college during rookie minicamp. They decided to take a look at him at left tackle. They liked what they saw, and they're going to stick with him there. I don't think that he's going to move off left tackle. I think he's going to be their left tackle, at least for this season. We'll see how it goes. Trevor Penning, who had been playing left tackle, played left tackle his whole career, but really struggled last year, got benched. I think his confidence really kind of went to the floor. They're trying to give him a fresh start and moving him over to the right side. And we'll see how that goes. They have a new offensive line coach. I think that the partnership between some of the young offensive linemen and Doug Marrone, who was offensive line coach last year, didn't go the way they'd hoped, and so I think that's the hope, is that you give Trevor a full offseason. From his rookie to second season, he was dealing with a Liz Frank injury, had surgery, so he really didn't get that offseason. And now they're hoping with John Benton, you can really kind of tease a more productive version of Trevor. His issue has always been between the ears. It's always been technique based. He's got the athleticism is there. So I think that's the idea, is you shift blocking, you're doing more wide zone, you're getting him out of his stance a lot more. You're not asking him to sit back and pass protect one-on-one nearly as often, just a fraction of the amount that you might have previously. And you're moving on from some veteran guys, right? Andres Pete's no longer here. James Hurst, who was here for a while, he's retired. Ryan Ramczyk has been dealing with a kind of a degenerative knee for a while now, and it really sounds like that's going to end his career. Like he might make some crazy comeback that we're not anticipating, but right now it seems more like they're prolonging the inevitable to some extent.
That's a shame.
There's so many trades and so many first round picks, but yeah, he was part of that 2017 draft class, and we're talking about the drama with Alvin Kamara. That was such a great draft class. You had Marcus Williams, Trey Hendrickson, who they let walk as starring for the Bengals. He's one of those pieces. And so right now, the only picks from that 2017 class you have are Alvin Kamara and Marshawn Lattimore, Ryan Ramczyk. And, it's kind of seeing how that goes. But yeah, Ryan, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see Ryan on the field again. So that's kind of where I approach the offensive line.
Yeah. All right, before we go to defense, fans, we remind you to check out the Giants Huddle podcast. It features long-form interviews with Big Blue and league personnel. Find it on your favorite podcast platform or go to giants.com/podcasts. And remember, 2024 season ticket memberships are available. To learn more, go to giants.com/tickets and the Giants TV streaming app, Giants TV. It's free on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire TV, and the Giants mobile app. You can scout the Giants during the season if you like, Jeff. Just go to Giants TV. It's all there. Let's talk defense with you for a second. The front seven. I think you probably wish they had more pass rush out of those guys last year. And I know giving up 4.5 yards a carry against the rush is not exactly what you'd like to see either. I know Jordan is still there. He's as old as dirt. And Granderson's there on the other end. What can we expect to see? I know Willie Gay's coming in from Kansas City. That's a big deal.
Yeah, no, it is funny because, I'm in a weird spot right now because I'm at the age of when we start describing football players as old as dirt, right? Like Cam Jordan and I are the same age.
Tell me about it.
But when you talk about Cam in football years, yeah, he's ancient. It's just kind of funny. But Mark Ingram was the same way. Like Mark, they were in the same draft, but yeah. So that front seven is weird because they, a lot of times you'll say, "Wow, where's the pass rush? Why haven't they been investing in it? Why haven't they been spending draft capital on that position to build it up?" Well, they have. They have done that. In 2018, they drafted Marcus Davenport. He, was an injury-prone guy. They traded an extra pick to go get him. Like they were that invested in him, and he just did not get the job done. They let him walk after his 5th year. He went to the Vikings, got hurt immediately, and that's kind of been the story of his career. Peyton Turner was a 1st-round pick. He has been hurt like the entirety of his career. Last year it was funny. Peyton Turner, he's a guy that I think is a good football player. Like when we have seen him on the field, he has been productive. It's not a situation where it's like, oh, he's just not getting the job done. He just can't stay on the field. And it's not soft tissue stuff either. It's like last year, he got through the entirety of training camp. He was one of like 5 players to practice in every single training camp practice. And we're like, he's done it. He's finally figured out how to stay healthy. First game of the season. He, making a play on Ryan Tannehill. He gets a hand on Ryan Tannehill, and he, I think he gets turf toe, which, turf toe is one of those injuries that people think it's not as serious as it is because of the name. I mean, the man's toe is basically ripped off his foot. Like he had to have surgery to repair it. So it's not like it's a pain tolerance thing. It's not like he's just not playing through injuries. It's like, you can't play like that. So it's just bad luck. And so week 1, he had that injury. He didn't play again until week 18. So he bookended the season. And that's kind of been the story of his career, is like you see these kind of flashes, and then it's just this long swath of not being on the field. So he's a guy that if you can get some production out of, you feel good about, right? They signed Chase Young, another guy who has been hurt a lot of his career. He's dealing with a neck injury now. He had neck surgery to repair something. It's part of the reason the Saints were able to bring him in. If he's healthy, okay. Carl Granderson's a UDFA. He's not a guy they invested in, but he's a guy that they developed over a few years and has been really solid. They extended him last year. And then Isaiah Foskey, he was a 2nd-round pick last year, spent most of the season on the injury list. He had a quad injury. And so it's a situation where it's like you have plenty of pass rushers. Like a lot of times you'll say, oh, maybe a UDFA, they could fit him. No, like the depth in that room is there. They just haven't been able to get the players on the field. And that's the wild thing, because Cam Jordan has been the healthiest guy in like the history of the NFL. He's missed 1 game due to injury his entire career, and then everyone else around him. You'd think like, oh, maybe he can teach him his secrets. Nope. So there's that. They rebuilt the interior defensive line last year. I think a lot of the rushing issues happened earlier in the year. I think they got better as the season went on, particularly, late in the year, right? Like what did Saquon do in that week 15 game? They really locked people up later in the year. But you're talking about season-long stats, and they got kind of crushed early in the season in a lot of the same matchups, right? Like against the Bucs in week 4, they couldn't stop Keyshawn Vaughn, or I always forget the other running back's name. Like they were just running all over him on 1st down. In week 17, they got nothing. So I think that's a good sign for the Saints. That they didn't really change anything. Brian Brzee going into year 2. I think you'd like to see him develop into a more all-around player. He was mostly a pass rush, defensive tackle, 3-tech last year. Colin Saunders, Nathan Shepard. So, at the linebacker level, they've gotten a good amount of pressure. Obviously, like you mentioned, they brought in Willie Gay. So I feel like from a defensive perspective, you should remain consistent. I think this is still going to be that kind of top 10 unit, maybe not top 5, a lot of categories, but with the secondary that they have, they should be able to do the front 7 some favors in terms of creating pressure. So, if this defense is playing well, they're manning up on the outside, they're not doubling, and they're using their front 4 to get pressure, which just allows everyone to take the middle of the field away. And if you can do that, then I think this defense is going to give people some problems. But yeah, that's not the side of the ball that I'm worried about.
Well, it's hard not to like the corners in terms of Lattimore and Adebo, and obviously McKinstry. Kool-Aid comes in the draft, and I think a lot of people thought he was a great 2nd-round value. I don't know how much more Honey Badger's got in the tank, though, at safety. How will you grade that defensive backfield out in between the numbers?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. They've really rebuilt that in the last several years. It was Marcus Williams and Malcolm Jenkins for a while, right? They let they let Marcus Williams walk in free agency. He's on the Ravens now. Malcolm Jenkins retired, and so they brought in Tyrann Mathieu and Marcus May. Tyrann, I think, has been very consistent, and that's part of the reason I'm not concerned about it. Is we kind of know what to expect. He's just one of these guys that you can count on this exact level of production week in, week out. I think he had 4 interceptions last year. He's just a smart player. He knows where to be. Because I think like Demario Davis is in a similar situation, right?
Yeah.
This is an older player, but
there's
a point in your career that you can extend your career by moving earlier, right?
Right.
By being ahead of everyone else mentally, so that even if you have lost a half step, doesn't matter because you're already there. And I feel like when you watch Tyron on tape, that really stands out. Like he's always in the right spot, and that's very helpful for a defense. The other safety spot, I'm not sure, right? Jordan Howden, Jonathan Abram are all going to be in that mix. The way the Saints use their safeties, they kind of float around. You don't really have a strong and a free. You kind of have everyone's will be able to do everything on every snap to kind of confuse the offense to some extent. So, I think that is kind of if you start getting beat over the top, if you get outrun, and I think team speed was an issue on defense last year at points, that does become a concern. Like you don't have that kind of super hyper athlete in the secondary that you might want. But it becomes a lot easier with the corners because you can be a little, you don't have to crash down on everything because you can trust them to man up. Alontae Taylor's in that mix too. So the biggest question I have is who's the slot corner? Alontae Taylor did it last year.
Okay. I
wouldn't say he was a star in that role, right? He was kind of just, he had moments, but he got benched twice. I think it was week 16 and 18. He got benched just for performance, right? So that's going to be something you have to figure out. But I think Kool-Aid and Alontae are going to kind of compete for that safety spot, and whichever one or nickel spot, whichever one doesn't, is going to kind of be the backup on the outside. But I don't know. When I look at this Saints team, the secondary is what makes me feel like they should be able to hang in terms of like that's never been the unit that's let them down, right? Like you might not be able to get to the quarterback, but if that's the case, it's not on the secondary because you can't expect your secondary to cover forever.
Right.
So I feel pretty good. Like Tyron is a guy that his leadership is always gonna be almost as important as what he does on the field, in my opinion. And you have to have guys like that. So I like him out there. Plus, he's a great locker room guy. I love talking to him personally. So maybe I'm being a little soft on him.
That's always a plus for us. Hey, Jeff, good news. You got a few months now to go shopping and to find some of those winter jackets you're going to need. Okay, by the time you come up north when the Saints play the Giants in December. Appreciate your time today.
No problem, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Big Blue Kickoff Live, presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. And Big Blue Kickoff Live is part of the Giants podcast platforms everywhere, as well as giants.com/podcasts. I'm Paul Dottino. We'll see you next time.